Hello, everyone. This is the final panel of the weekend. And probably one of the more helpful ones physically, and actually mentally as well, because it's mental health. It's a mental health panel, mental wellness for devs, how to take care of yourself while you're developing, and all that sort of stuff. Presented by Suzanne Jackiw. You might recognize that name from earlier during the video game law panel. She also does some legal work for TakeThis.org, a non-profit organization for mental health. And I will let you take it away, Suzanne.
All right, awesome. So at the end of this super long and super exhausting IRX that has been amazing, but probably draining on a couple of you, I'm here to talk about mental health in the studio and whether we're looking at just work stress or actual mental illness. I'm Director of Special Operations and General Counsel at Take This. That means that I handle all of the legal stuff, and I also organize all of our volunteers in terms of both online initiatives and in terms of on-site at the conventions when we're doing merch sales or things of that nature and making sure everyone is where they ought to be. This presentation is by our clinical director, Dr. B, so everything in here is his fault. Please blame him. I'm not a clinician. I worked as a counselor of at-risk youth for 2 years, but other than that, I have no formal training in mental health. But I'm here to share some really useful information in terms of what you can do to take care of yourself when developing games. So Take This is all about removing the stigma of mental health issues by talking about it through stories and articles, by creating spaces where people can recover when overwhelmed at events, by getting people talking and asking questions. And on that note, thanks for having us and for tuning in and for being part of this conversation. Our most visible outreach effort is the AFK room, which began in PAX in 2014. If you haven't seen one, what it is it's a quiet room with puzzles that's staffed by clinicians. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, or any other number of feelings that can show up at the bright lights and constant go of a convention, we're there to support you. Our other outreach efforts include partnerships with folks like GameStop, Geek and Sundry, Habitica, IGN, Bethesda, and Wormwood Gaming. These are my goals. If I do this right, this is the stuff we'll cover. The question that every high schooler has asked every guidance counselor forever is, what is normal? So we'll look at how that applies to stress and to mental illness in particular. We'll also look at how all of that relates to working in games. This presentation has a particular emphasis on a studio environment, but I'm going to talk about how solo devs may also be impacted by the same kinds of things and point out what you can do to help yourself. And then we'll finally cover how to take care of yourself, something that I am admittedly terrible at, but I'm working on it, and something that you guys should totally be working on too. So this image is not trying to say that this is normal, but normal does exist, and it's probably not what you think it is, and it probably doesn't apply in the ways that you think it does. Normal is, according to the statistics folks and folks like that, adhering to an expected average pattern or behavior. Normal is the expected outcome or behavior of about 2/3 of the time in any given situation. It's a narrow statistical term which shifts over time in groups, not a personal judgment. What's normal to one group may not be normal to another. For example, I'm 6 feet tall. Being 6 feet tall is perfectly normal for a man in the US. Being 6 feet tall is abnormal for a woman in the US and makes buying pants nearly impossible, but doable. Other things that are not normal are Stephen Hawking's IQ, living to be 100 years old, attending graduate school, making a blockbuster game, finishing law school, becoming a successful working musician or actor, and any number of other things. These are obviously not bad, but they're totally abnormal. So how does this apply to all of you guys, and why am I giving you this weird education on what normal is? Distraction and avoidance behaviors are anything. All of your hobbies, think screen time, cooking, playing games, sleeping, and anything else that you do as a reaction to stress. There's a difference between them, even though they can look the same. Distraction behaviors are a temporary behavior you use to muster the mental resources to face the problem, because you know you can handle it when you get there. For me, this is Cookie Clicker. I open up Cookie Clicker, I play some Cookie Clicker. I would love some support in the chat from folks that also play Cookie Clicker, because I teach a game dev camp and folks there had no idea what Cookie Clicker was. Avoidance behaviors, on the other hand, are behaviors that avoid the problem because you're sure you can't handle it. And that avoidance actually makes the problem worse. It's staying up till 2 a.m. playing video games when you have a paper due in the morning and severely limiting your ability to handle doing that paper. It makes the situation worse. It doesn't just prepare you for that situation. So this is a common pattern. Everyone reacts to stress, and we all have different genetic dispositions to how much stress we can handle. Some folks can handle a lot of stress and be okay and have good coping mechanisms, and some folks can't handle as much stress regardless of the ability of their coping mechanisms. This is a common pattern. Not everyone falls prey to it. It's a common thing unless the stress responses are adaptive and short-term. So an adaptive stress response might be going for a walk. It's not going to increase your vulnerability to the stressful situation, and it's not going to cause you to become less resilient to stress in the future. Moving my notes. Mental illness. Nearly 20% of folks will be diagnosed with at least one mental illness in a year. That does not include substance use disorders and developmental disorders like autism spectrum disorders or intellectual disabilities. Anxiety disorders are a whole family of disorders. These include generalized anxiety disorders, social phobia, panic disorders, agoraphobia, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and specific phobias. Mood disorders include major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and dysthymic disorder. Part of the challenge of diagnosing mental illness is that there's a symptom overlap between many different mental illnesses and a wide variety of ways in which a mental illness can manifest in a particular person. Our clinical director, Dr. B, tells people that he's only diagnosed ADHD once in an adult in his entire career. Not because it doesn't exist, but because attention can be affected by all kinds of mood disorder. For example, if you have anxiety, you're not going to be able to focus. If you have schizophrenia, developmental disorders like autism, or even sleep difficulties, you're not going to be able to focus, and that might be misdiagnosed as an attention disorder. The reason why it's so difficult is because it's not like doing a swab for strep throat where you have a specific set of germs you're looking for. For major depressive disorder, for example, one must meet the criteria for at least 5 out of 9 symptoms. And I'm sure a lot of you are programmers with math backgrounds, and you can figure out how many possible combinations that is. And other illnesses can actually mimic some of those symptoms. For example, low thyroid looks a lot like major depressive disorder. I love this picture. So, mental illness is not normal stress. We've all got a little mental illness. This is like the trigger sentence for our clinical director. On the surface, it might seem like an inclusive and compassionate statement that normalizes mental health. But if you think about it a little bit more, it's a statement that undermines the seriousness and impact of legitimate mental illness by equating it with normal stress. It's like someone dismissively saying, we've all got problems, what's the big deal? It also runs the risk of sending the message to someone with mental health issues that it is somehow their fault for not dealing with it like other people do, which can actually help aggravate their challenges. We all deal with challenges and problems, but we don't all deal with mental illness. Now, that's not to say that it has to be mental illness to be a problem. Just because something doesn't rise to the level of requiring a clinical diagnosis doesn't mean it's not a legitimate problem or concern. There are many commonly occurring stressors that are serious, impactful, and aren't mental illness. They often result in temporary changes in behavior or mood, and some are more extreme than others. For example, if aliens invaded New York, you might be a little bit stressed out and need to get shawarma with your friends. It does have to be a serious problem to be mental illness. In all mental illnesses, there's a serious impact on one's life or the lives of those around the person. They cause a person to be unable to engage in the routine, ordinary activities of life, or force that person to do so only with considerable difficulty. Routine activities are things like work, hobbies, relationship, or hygiene. One way of thinking about this is the 4 Ds. Well, a person's behavior may be deviant, aka different from the norm. It's not necessarily a mental illness. Think of eccentric people, scientific pioneers, or others who just love extreme sports. Technically, their behaviors are deviant from the norm, but on their own aren't a problem. Think of maybe even some of the behaviors just mentioned are a little dangerous, but they don't cause a person's life to be disrupted. They can still work and maintain their relationships. It's when we start seeing a combination of all of these Ds, distress, dysfunction, devious, and danger, especially when those problems are causing distress to those around you as well, that we start to consider a mental illness. Medieval combat. I don't know if that's a... Does it cause you distress? So, moving on though, what does this mean for folks in the studio and for developers at home? And in particular, in this segment, I'm going to be talking about crunch time, which I'm sure is something a lot of you are very familiar with. Let's get all these up here. Employees who work more than 55 hours a week compared to those working 35 to 40 hours a week are 2 times more likely to experience shortened sleep hours, 3.7 times more likely to find it difficult to fall asleep, and 2 times more likely to wake up without feeling refreshed. Repeated exposure to long work hours greatly increases these odds. Please note that I'm not saying work hours from only one job. I'm talking about work hours total. So if you're working 35 hours a week at your day job and then coming home and deving for 15 to 20 hours a week, you are hitting that 55-hour-a-week threshold. As to the later points, people who work 11 plus hours a day have almost 2.5 times higher risk of experiencing a major depressive episode compared to those working 7 to 8 hour days. People identified as workaholics were found to have higher rates of ADHD, OCD, anxiety, and depression compared with those who weren't ranked as being addicted to work. Overtime workers were found to have significantly higher anxiety and depression levels and higher prevalence of anxiety and depressive disorders compared to those working normal hours. Compared to people who work normal hours, meaning the 35 to 40 hours a week, not the 55 hours, the people that are working 55 hours a week are more at risk for heart disease and stroke. People working in jobs with overtime schedules experienced a 61 higher injury hazard rate compared to jobs without overtime. And in a national Australian survey, employee cognition increased for hours worked up to 25 per week. Beyond that, cognitive abilities decreased. By 60 hours of work per week, cognition was lower than people who weren't working at all. So basically, if you're working more than 60 hours a week, the things you are doing over that 60-hour mark are worse than not doing anything. You are working backwards. Let's talk about the financial effects of crunch. Not yet. Okay. Lower quality work products. Software defects were significantly higher in projects that required overtime than those that did not. And game developers that reported high rates of crunch on projects also reported decreased return on investment and lower Metacritic scores for the resulting products. So not taking care of yourself and engaging in crunch gets you a lower Metacritic score. Lower Metacritic score. Okay, just wanted to emphasize that. Increased cost to employers per employee. What that means is that in a study of 4 U.S.-based companies, productivity losses related to fatigue were estimated to cost employers nearly $2,000 per employee each year. And those productivity losses related to personal and family health costs. In a study of large, multi-employer, multi-site employee population, healthcare expenditures for employers with a high level of stress were almost 50% higher than those for employees that did not have high level of stress. Each year, depression costs the U.S. employers $44 billion in lost productivity alone. Let's see. Now you guys can see that slide. By the way, I honestly have no idea of the film that this picture is from, but our clinical director, Dr. B, is a huge film buff. So if anyone can enlighten me, I'd greatly appreciate it. Oh, it's the old Ghostbusters. Okay, now I just feel foolish. Um, so we we will have tips for each person to augment their own mental health. You, as a manager, if there's managers out there, hold a lot of sway over your employees' health and morale. In a work environment, the power differential is tilted in your favor, and a lot of employees feel powerless without your support, and that can lead to lowered morale. This picture I do get, you guys, so like we're good here. I keep over-clicking. Okay, so this one's from The Simpsons. I hope you all know that. It's Hank Scorpio. He's a great manager. It's one of those truisms in social interaction that the person with the most social power generally sets the standards of behavior. If they are more casual, others will be too. If they are more formal, others follow suit. So watch the language you use when talking to employees or even folks that are just lower than you on the totem pole in terms of mental health concerns. The language you use literally sets the standard for the people whom you manage. If you talk dismissively about mental health issues, you may lose time, productivity, and eventually employees. Increased stress is linked to higher turnover intentions mediated by job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and perceived organizational support. Although varied, the average cost to replace an employee is 20% of the employee's salary. Greater turnover rates means greater cost to the company, not to mention the cost of lost productivity due to time spent training new employees. Employee retention means lowered costs. Repeated job strain and repeated situations of low social support at work are both linked to increases in major depressive disorder. You should incentivize efficiency over visible hours worked. And that means don't reward or promote people for spending their whole lives at the office. Promote and reward people for getting the best work done while still maintaining an outside the office life. Promoting people who are workaholics to managerial positions helps create a maladaptive environment. That means unhealthy. Since they are likely, they will expect the same from their employees as what you expect from them to get to that point. In terms of incentivizing work-life balance, there are numerous ways to do this, such as giving monetary rewards for regular checkups with their doctor or preventative health measures like exercise, or even creating a competition of who can obtain the most consecutive nights of over 6 hours of sleep, which would be amazing. All right, so here we go with some signs people are on distress. So we need to watch out for each other and make sure that the folks in our lives are taking care of themselves when they need to take care of themselves. And this is particularly notable if you notice these kinds of things coming up for folks. Now we're going to switch gears and focus on how you can take care of yourself and things you can do to feel better when working in maybe not the healthiest environment, even if your managers aren't necessarily the most supportive. And these are, once again, an overview of what we're going to be going over in this last section, which I'm going through really quickly. So the first thing is setting goals. You need to make them specific and measurable. I want to be healthier is not a good goal. It's awesome, but what does it mean? It's not descriptive. It's not easy to meet a goal you haven't defined, and it's easy to get discouraged when you don't get the results you want. So when you don't get quote unquote healthier, you don't feel like you're succeeding and you're more likely to give up. The more specific, measurable, and reasonable your goals are, the more likely you are to meet them or at least make progress. If and when there's a problem or challenge with your goal, you can troubleshoot specific and measurable goals, but I want to be healthier and then I eat a bag of sugar cookies. I don't know what the specific problem is in relation to being healthier. Specific measurable goals can be tracked. For example, some good goals. I want to do at least 30-minute workout a week for 3 or more times a week. I want to limit my soda intake to 40 ounces per week or less. I want to eat no more than 16 ounces of red meat in a week. Wearables are super great for specific defined health-related goals. I have my Fitbit. My Fitbit didn't help me with my health-related goals, but my Pokemon eggs have. That's just anecdotal, but it's interesting. Also, there are online programs like Habitica or Super Better that can be great ways of gamifying your behaviors and healthy habits. Take This actually works in partnership with Habitica to provide sponsored community wellness, mental wellness related things. I would like to note, though, because I find it super entertaining, the 3 goals listed on this page, I have achieved none of ever in my entire life. So we're all working towards goals. All right, so you need to celebrate your improvements. Don't think about self-care, success, and goals as a binary concepts of success and failure. Try to think of it as a process. This is part of the reason that measurable goals for self-care are so needed, because you will slip up. That's expected. You want to be able to look for an upward trend instead of just individual day things. And particularly in emphasis to minimizing, it's a form of distorted thinking where a person dismisses all their good in progress. If you find yourself saying or thinking things like, yeah, I'm doing great, but it's only because I didn't have the chance to do whatever it is, you're probably minimizing. Instead, try to acknowledge that even though it's a little success, it's entirely you and you are awesome, and then strategize ways to get even better. So these environmental and routine changes. This is another slide that I am also working on. Exercise, in particular, should be at your fitness level, and ideally it's something that holds interest for you. For me, that's things like MMA and Pokemon. Weird combos. But you could take a walk, you could join a gym, you can find a workout accountability buddy. Maybe you and the rest of your development team could go on bike rides and discuss your next features or certain problems you're having in development. Catching Pokemon, you should probably be going at a brisk pace, but once again, to your level. And you should expect pushback as your routine changes. So when you are all of a sudden eating healthier foods and not willing to go out for 2 a.m. to the Mexican joint that's spectacular, your friends may not approve of that as much, but they need to know and respect that you're getting healthy. Okay, so this slide is for all of you, really just all of you right now. Sleep. So the effects of sleep deprivation, which is getting less than 6 to 7 hours of sleep a night. Your brain will start feeling fuzzy. Your mood could swing all over the place. Your skin and generally your body will not look as fresh or healthy as it would otherwise. Your appetite will skyrocket, generally not for like a kale salad. Like I said, that's when the 2 a.m. Mexican kicks in, or the whole bag of sugar cookies. Your metabolism is going to slow down, so you're not going to be able to break down those foods. And your athletic performance will decline too, so you're going to have a lot harder time playing Pokemon and working out generally. Your immune system will weaken, so you'll get sick more often, not only immediately, but over time it'll get even worse. And on the topic of caffeine, tolerance just means that you need more to get the same effect. So our clinical director has mentioned one of his professors who, by the end of the professor's doctorate, consumed 3 pots of coffee a day just to get the same effect. A lot of folks, that's 2 liters of soda or any number of other things. And a rebound effect means that when you stop ingesting caffeine, you end up more tired than if you had had no caffeine. I love that you're also into these new terms like working out and sleeping. So here's some more about sleep. Go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time every day. My alarm is currently set to 9:15 because I'm in Chicago and working on West Coast time, which is spectacular. But a lot of folks don't have that. That includes the weekends. Your body doesn't understand staying up till 2 a.m. on the weekends. Refrain from nicotine, caffeine, and alcohol, and big meals close to bedtime. Notice that it doesn't say refrain from those things altogether. We're not asking for everything, but it definitely helps if you refrain from those things right before bed. And keeping your sleeping area between 60 and 67 degrees, particularly in these hot summer months. Sleeping in a hot room is not easy or good for you. Getting a good mattress may be difficult. There are financial limitations there, but it is super helpful. And practicing a relaxing ritual before bedtime, this could be something like meditation. Screen time isn't really the best, but maybe going for a walk without Pokemon, because once again, the issues with screen time. Some more sleep hygiene tips, avoiding afternoon naps. This is something I'm working on. I love afternoon naps, but they aren't helpful for actual sleep habits. You should exercise, but you should not exercise right before bed. You shouldn't stay in bed if you can't fall asleep. You should go to a different, dimly lit room and read a book. Reading is actually shown to increase ability to fall asleep. Also, weird side note, if you watch videos of people brushing hair, it helps you fall asleep, which is interesting and not something I expected, but that's okay. Don't use your screens in bed. I can't help this. I have my phone with me at all times, and it's usually on. But you have to avoid bright or full spectrum lights. There are settings in most phones that allow you to change your settings so that they're better for you during sleep. This is Dr. B's slide. Turn off the screens. Your recreational screen time should be limited to less than 2 hours a day for adults. Now, recreational screen time means after you've been sitting in front of the computer for work all day. If you're anything like me, you spend literally all day in front of the screen. And it's super helpful to just walk away from it, even for a while. Usage above that level is correlated with anxiety, attention disruptive, and mood problems. In particular, social media has been shown to be correlated with certain mood problems and anxieties. The screens also mess with your sleep pattern, as mentioned before. The light wavelengths closer to blue on the end of the spectrum tend to interfere with sleep the most. They delay the onset, they decrease your alertness the next morning, they reduce your sleepiness, and they lower your melatonin secretion. This is our clinician, our clinical director, Dr. B's favorite quote. Therapy is too good to be limited to the sick. So let's talk about therapy. And this is my last little thing. I'm running super fast. So therapy is beneficial for more than just mental illness. Executives who need a reality check, for example, there are entire practices dedicated to having CEOs and executives come in and get honest feedback and a space to work through ideas in a confidential way. Many folks have a therapist on call that they only see occasionally for supportive and reflective work when they're working through a particular issue. Positive psychology is not hippie woo-woo crap. It's psychology that has been more or less pretty good about getting people back to better than they already are. Psychology is generally aimed at getting people back to functioning levels, but in the last few decades, questions have been raised and research is more focused on what to do after people are functioning. Basically, how to improve your life beyond the norm. Look up positive psychology if you're curious about this generally. Dr. B is very into this, and he highly recommends it. With mental illness, therapy is better than talking to a friend. If you believe you have some sort of mental illness impairing your ability to function, the evidence is that psychotherapy is way more beneficial and has greater efficacy than just talking to a friend. This was confirmed in a landmark study that Consumer Reports published in 1995. It was a real study, not one of those like, we asked 3 people on the street. And it showed that mental illness is best helped by therapy. There are several possible reasons. One is therapists are familiar with and have experience in how to empathetically address clinical concerns. They also have experience and knowledge about the range of human behaviors and the difference between normal stress reactions and mental illness, and the fact that they focus on you exclusively and objectively. There we go. And technique of your therapist is less important than a good relationship with the therapist. There's a number thrown around in the psychology world of 30% is the importance of the relationship. And this is based on research that looked at common factors present in all forms of psychotherapy and looked at how much they affected the change outcomes in a therapy situation. While differing research came up with slightly different numbers, the single greatest controllable factor in therapeutic outcome is relationship with the therapist. Basically, you're not going to get into those really important issues if you don't trust your therapist, like them, get along with them, and want to talk to them. All right, well, that's my little spiel, and I got through it 15 minutes ahead of time, so I guess you're welcome. I put some links up on the page, but my little thing down there at the bottom is kind of covering up some of them. TakeThis.org is our website. It's full of stories, resources, and information about who we are and what we do. If you'd like to volunteer with us at any of the conventions that we work at, or just through like an online type situation, fill out that form. Your response will get spit out to me. If you want to talk to me about something more specific, that's my email at TakeThis.
Thank you, Suzanne. If anyone has questions in the chat, please feel free to post them. And another thing to take into consideration is if you're ever doing any, we were kind of discussing this before the panel started, is if you are doing any kind of, what the hell am I thinking of charity stream or something like that, or any kind of charity work. It's been a long day. Please consider TakeThis.org as one of your charities, or the charity to donate to, as they are a nonprofit and could use the funding.
So, I have a question for you.
I can barely hear you, Rev.
You're very
Sorry,
quiet.
how's
There you
that?
Good.
Sorry, I've got a question. How do you not recognize Ghostbusters?
Okay, so like I was never a movie person.
Okay.
My parents are in their 70s, so like I was a super whoops baby. And so like we never did movies. We did books, and when I got my first computer, I started video games, but there was never like a movies thing. My boss is actually paying me to watch Jaws.
Okay.
And the Godfather.
I want to
Like,
be
okay.
paid to watch
Godfather's
that.
great.
Because I've not watched either of those, and apparently I'm not getting half of his jokes because of it.
Well, if you ever want a movie education, I happen to have specialized in it.
Amazing. I watch to catch up on all of the movies of the past ever.
For the last 60 years, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
Best movie ever. Go.
yeah, and I
Best
was,
movie ever of all time ever?
Ever.
Ooh, that's a
I mean, The
rough-
Godfather's pretty good.
But it's not the best movie of
It's
all
not
time.
the best movie of all time.
No.
What I will say, I'll say this. I will say, in terms of having the most impact on society worldwide, as well as the film industry, there is no movie more impactful than Star Wars,
Yep.
the original.
Okay, so like that's a movie I've actually seen because my brother is obsessed with Star Wars.
Me too. I'm a Mandalorian.
I'm not very big on the new high budget fan fictions that are coming out, but I mean the original two trilogies are fine.
So okay, I did have a topical question for you.
All right.
You kind of talked about, obviously sleep being important, and how can you try and enforce the good habit building of, going to sleep at a certain time? Like that's something that I always I'm on call 24/7, so I try and get to bed at around the same time so I can get enough sleep, but I can't do the screen turning off thing because I never know if I'm going to get a call from a hospital and I need to remote in and take care of something so that they can do a heart surgery on a geriatric. But like for others that may not have that kind of professional requirement, what methods would you recommend that they might look at for enforcing a no screens and bedtime at a reasonable hour?
So by enforcing, are we enforcing this on ourselves, or are you asking for like, a mandatory?
Self enforcement.
Okay, so I have alarms on my phone, and I also have alarms on my Fitbit. So it starts buzzing 30 minutes before I'm supposed to go to sleep each night, which sometimes works out and sometimes doesn't because we're all flawed human beings. But at that point, I actively decide that I'm going to step away from the screens, and I pick up a book. I'm always reading something. Sometimes it's the U.S. Privacy Manual for Law because I'm lame, and sometimes it's a bit more fun, like a Christopher Moore book or something like that. But books are by far one of the best ways to wind down because something about, and not ebooks because that's a screen. So stop it.
I was gonna say all of my
Stop
books
it.
are now on my tablet. So.
Stop it. Use real paper. It smells amazing. Or just sitting down and meditating. I know a lot of folks get a lot of flack for meditation because it's considered this weird Eastern thing, but it actually is really helpful. There's some really fun and interesting videos for meditation on YouTube that I don't know if I could suggest because I'm currently representing Take This. But if you have a particular style of meditation you're interested in, audiobooks are also a great suggestion. Really just stepping away from those screens and spending 30 minutes just kind of letting your mind unwind and not be connected to the thing you've been doing.
So here's another thing. Like, I used to have a job, it was years ago, working at a convenience store, and I was the overnight person. So, 8 hours overnight, and so meaning I had to sleep during the day.
Yeah.
That job actually, that and other reasons as well that had to do with that job, but and also life, just all kind of collectively, I had a borderline nervous breakdown because of it back then. So what would you suggest to someone who has to be up all night? And in this, I figured this goes for devs as well, because a lot of devs I know work all night. So what's your suggestions for someone who has to stay up during the night and has to sleep during the day?
If you're not competing with another job, because as a dev, a lot of us, I'm currently building a game, so I understand the desire to stay up for an extra 3 to 5 hours a night working on your game. But if you're not competing with that and you're just staying up late at night and then being up during the day, you're really just going to flip your entire schedule. Like, you're going to need to turn off all forms of communication so that folks can't get a hold of you and wake you up and demand you go out with them to lunch, because that's your middle of the night. And dark rooms, not enough can be said for like blackout curtains and dark rooms if you're trying to sleep when it's light outside. Also cold rooms, as I mentioned, the temperature of the room is super important.
Awesome.
VDEX in chat. Any developers in here who haven't got a mental health issue, do a backflip if you're completely sane.
Okay, but we need that on camera, you guys.
And then everyone just falls on their face.
So yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for another fantastic panel. I definitely learned something from it, and I'm not a dev, but there's stuff that I can apply in my life.
Yeah, it really applies to everyone taking care of yourself.
Lord knows you're
that's why I hate the light thing. Really gets me, because I have trouble sleeping in the summer at any time.
Yeah.
Just because the light comes through. And I've got some pretty dark curtains, but it's just enough to really just absolutely make the last few hours of sleep.
I have one other thing, too, that I heard recently about, because a lot of people, you mentioned something about being completely normal, and there's kind of an anxiety revolving around that in itself about the judgment aspect. And to be honest, like, people with anxiety issues or depression, when you look at it from a biological stance, it's really it's like someone, like, think about it as a computer. It's like wires being crossed, something that isn't really the way it's supposed to be in there, physically speaking. So really, when you're like, oh, well, I'm not normal, well, it's not that you're not normal. The normal you is in there. It's just, when you get help, or when you get in some cases like medication, things like that, that makes you the normal you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not something to be ashamed of when you're trying to make yourself the way that you were originally intended to be, Yeah.
Our tagline is, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," because so many folks feel that mental illness or even just mental health issues are alienating them from the folks around them. So that sense of being able to say, hey, I'm having this issue, but it's not me, it's just this issue, is so important.
Not to mention, I was a psych major in college too, and one of the psych professors mentioned, like, really, when you think about it, there's not one single person that's like the definition of normal. Everyone has flaws and quirks and things like that. Everyone has anxiety about something. There's always something that's going to be, quote, wrong with you. So it's not. So when you feel alone, you're really not, because everyone has something going on. So and of course, always reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Always reach out. There's actually a SpongeBob episode, because, I don't know movies, but I know
The one with
SpongeBob,
Squidward.
where he tries to become completely normal, and it removes, like, all of the holes from his spongy exterior,
Oh.
and he's always just calm, happy, and talking about things like the weather, and he's just awful that entire episode. And I think that says something, because, like, the things that make us abnormal or that we deviate from the norm on are the things that make us interesting to be around, which is some of them aren't adaptive or healthy or helpful.
And you also too have to consider that as somebody who suffered from depression and a lot of really bad stuff going into high school and through high school and a little bit after high school, and then getting out of that, it's really hard to, like, everyone always tells you, it's like, oh, it gets better, everything will be fine later on, but you don't believe it. And it really is, but you have to understand that you aren't in the right mental capacity to understand that it will get better, but it actually will. And if you just try to change your perspective on things and pull yourself out of what is actually bringing you down, you will have a chance of actually making yourself not awful feeling.
It sucks too, because there's kind of a lot of cliches float around, and but the thing is, a lot of those cliches are true. Like, like,
it's so weird.
And when you're in a funk or in depression or something like that, time really does make it better. You will come out of it, and everyone always says that. But when you think about it, like, when you're in a good place and you think back, well, I remember that time, man, that was a really shitty part of my life. Well, you came out of it. You're in a good place now. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And probably for the better, to be honest. A lot of times that makes you stronger, those kinds of situations, because you learn from. Sometimes it's because of a mistake you made, and you learn from it, or you're like, well, I didn't have to deal with it that way. Because I think back when I was in college, I was pretty emo, so not like the emo-ver and all that sort of stuff, but I was pretty sensitive. And I'm like, why? And I look back at it now with with a more mature mind. I'm like, why? Why would that was so not even important.
And you know what's really kind of funny is that I look back and I think I can actually, now that I've had a chance to rationalize it, I can find exactly what the cause of so many different problems was, and a lot of it was me putting myself in a situation that was setting me up for disaster, but I didn't see it, and I thought it was the right thing to do at the time.
Yep.
So if there's ever something that you think might be causing you trouble, or you just feel really bad, take a second and step back and itemize all of your choices that you think might play a role in either making you feel better or making you feel worse, and then think about how those affected you and really try to think about it critically and clear your mind about it, and you might be able to figure out what the problem is, because half of another cliche here, the first half of solving a problem is finding out and admitting that you have one.
Yeah.
Because that's the hardest part. That is legitimately the hardest part, and then everything after that, you're already halfway done, and you can start on a path to fixing that.
VDEX in the chat too. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. And it's also super important to reach out to folks when you can't do that yourself, whether they be therapists or friends or family, just someone out there to know what it is that you're doing.
And VDEX in the chat too brought up a good point, because I was mentioning, talking about the cliches. A lot of times they are true, but it is probably some of the worst things that you can do, is because it seems patronizing and condescending when you tell the person to man up, or it will get better, or it's not that bad, that sort of thing. It's like, you don't know what that person's dealing with at the time. You're not in their shoes, so you do have to have at least a little bit of tact, especially if you're going to expect them to, when you're saying, oh, reach out, well, maybe they don't want to reach out because you're being kind of a douche,
Yeah.
So you have to try and see, when you're on the other side of things and you see someone in a bad place, you have to see it from their point of view before trying to talk to them about it,
It's how dangerous that statement, we all have a little mental illness, is, and it just undermines what that is in comparison to our normal experiences.
Yeah.
All right.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Suzanne, so much. Greatly appreciate, again.
Totally.
You did a fantastic job last year. You did an amazing job earlier today, and an even better job this afternoon.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on IRX.
Of course.
Looking forward to next year, maybe?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
I'm on board as long as you guys are having me back.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I can't think of a reason why not.
Yes.
All right. Well,
All right, awesome.
I will. I'll get you out of the chat here, and hope you enjoy. If you're sticking around for it, I hope you enjoy the award ceremony and the live gameplay.
Totally.